The cave was silent at first, only the sound of the man's boots echoing on the stone floor. He had come here to explore, to map the unknown tunnels that twisted deep beneath the alien world. The air was thin, the light dim, but he kept moving. Then, the ground trembled. It began as a faint vibration under his feet, then grew into a violent shaking. The walls groaned as if the planet itself was angry. Dust fell from above, and before he could react, the ceiling cracked. The rocks rained down. He raised his arms to shield himself, but the force knocked him to the ground. Pain shot through his body. When the quake ended, he looked around. The path behind him was buried under tons of stone. There was no way back, no way out. For a long moment he lay still, his chest heaving. The silence after the collapse felt louder than the quake itself. He reached for his pack, but half of it was crushed under fallen rock. Only a few scraps remained. His water flask was broken. The little food he carried was gone. Fear crept into his heart. He was trapped, and the air already felt heavier. He tried to calm himself, tried to think. He had trained for emergencies, but this was different. This was isolation on a hostile world where no rescue would come. He switched on his headlamp. The beam cut through the dust. The tunnel ahead stretched. Into darkness, the only way was forward. He forced himself to stand. Each step echoed, reminding him he was alone. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning in the dark. His throat grew dry. His stomach ached with hunger. Every sound seemed louder than it was. The crunch of gravel under his boots, the drip of water far away, his own breathing. Then he heard something else, a sound that froze him in place. It was soft, trembling. Not the growl of a beast, not the hiss of shifting stone. It was a whimper. He turned his head, his lamp sweeping across jagged rocks, and there, between two slabs of stone, something moved. Small, fragile, hiding. He took a careful step closer. The whimper grew louder. It was the sound of a child. The man's heart pounded. In this endless cave, in this deadly trap, he was not alone. His light fell on her. A tiny alien girl curled up against the stone, her skin faintly glowing, her eyes wide with fear. She looked no older than 6 human years. Yet her features were strange, her ears long, her hair shimmering like threads of silver. She clutched a small container tightly to her chest as if it was her only treasure. Her gaze locked on the man, half fearful, half desperate. The man raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. His voice cracked from thirst as he whispered, "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The girl didn't move, her tiny frame trembling, her fingers gripping the container even tighter. He sank down to the stone floor, lowering himself so he wouldn't look threatening. The cave was silent again. Only the girl's soft breathing reached his ears. He realized something then. She was trapped just like him. Too small to climb, too weak to push the rocks, and too alone to survive. The man's chest tightened. He thought he had lost everything when the cave collapsed. But now, staring at this fragile child, he felt something different. Responsibility. He couldn't leave her, not even if he wanted to. But survival was already slipping through his fingers. He was thirsty, his body weak, and the girl seemed no stronger. The container she guarded might hold something valuable. Maybe water, maybe food, but she was unwilling to share. He leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment, exhaustion pulling at him. The cave pressed in like a prison. Every breath felt heavier. Still, one thought echoed in his mind: he was not alone anymore. In this endless darkness, in this trap of stone and silence, 2 lives were bound together by fate. A human man and a tiny alien girl, both staring at the edge of survival, both unsure if tomorrow would ever come. The quake had sealed their path. The cave had swallowed their hope. But in that fragile whimper, in that pair of glowing eyes, the man found something he hadn't expected. Both a burden and a reason to keep moving. The collapse had taken away his freedom, but it had given him something else, a companion, and perhaps the only chance to survive the darkness ahead. The man sat in the darkness, his back pressed against the cold stone wall, the weight of the collapse heavy on his shoulders, but his eyes stayed on the small alien girl hidden between the rocks. Her faint glow was the only light besides his dying headlamp. She hadn't moved since he first found her. Her, silver hair spilling over her face, her tiny body trembling. She looked fragile, like she could break apart if touched, yet her arms were locked around that strange container as though it was the only thing keeping her alive. The man spoke softly, his voice low, careful not to startle her. "I won't hurt you, little one," he said, the words echoing weakly. Off the stone, the girl's ears twitched, her wide eyes fixed on him, but she didn't reply. Of course she didn't, he realized. She wouldn't understand his words. She was alien, her language, her thoughts, her world, completely different from his. And yet, fear looked the same in any species. The silence stretched long, broken only by the drip of unseen water far away. His throat ached with thirst. Every swallow felt like fire. Still, he tried to look calm, because if he looked desperate, the girl would retreat even further. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the only thing left unbroken after the collapse. A small light stick with a faint crack. He snapped it to life. A soft green glow filled the air, pushing back the shadows just a little. The girl flinched, her arms tightening around the container, but her eyes stayed fixed on the light. Curiosity flickered in her gaze. The man placed the glowing stick gently on the ground between them, pushing it forward just a little, not too close, not too fast. Then he leaned back again, showing he meant no harm. Minutes passed. Her tiny fingers loosened slightly. Her glowing eyes darted between him and the light stick. Finally, slowly, she stretched out one delicate hand, touched the glowing stick, and pulled it closer to her hiding place. The man allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He studied her carefully. Her frame was thin, too thin. He could see the outline of her bones under her pale skin. She was starving, just like him, yet she still held that container like a mother protecting her child. What was inside it? Water? Food? Or something stranger? His lips were cracked, his stomach ached, but he didn't dare lunge for it. Trust could not be forced, not here, not now. Instead, he pointed at himself, tapped his chest and whispered, "Human." His voice rasped, then he pointed at her, waiting. The girl blinked, clutching her container tighter. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a trembling voice, she whispered something, the sound delicate, musical, almost like a song. The word meant nothing to him, but it was her name. He could feel it. He repeated the sound clumsily, his voice breaking on the alien syllables. Her eyes widened in surprise. She hugged the container close, but her trembling slowed. For the first time, he saw something in her. Eyes other than fear. It was doubt, confusion, maybe even the beginning of trust. He tried to shift closer, just a few inches. The stone scraped under his boots. The girl stiffened, ready to retreat deeper between the rocks, so he stopped, raising his hands again, showing peace, showing patience. The hours dragged on. The man's body grew weaker. His lips split, his breathing harsh. The darkness pressed in heavier, but still he kept his eyes on the child. Still he waited. Then, a sound broke the silence. Her stomach growled. It was faint, but he heard it. Her thin frame curled tighter. Her glowing eyes flickered. With shame, she was starving just like him. The man reached to his belt, pulling free a broken ration bar half smashed to dust, but still something. He placed it on the stone between them, pushing it forward. The girl's eyes darted to the food, then back. To him, hesitation burned in her expression. At last, she reached out with trembling fingers, took the piece and pressed it to her lips. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him. Every bite was cautious, suspicious, as if she expected him to strike, but he didn't. He just leaned back, his own hunger tearing at him, but his heart strangely calm. When she finished, she whispered her name again, this time clearer, as if offering it to him. The man repeated it, firmer, stronger. Her glowing eyes softened. For the first time, the girl crawled a little closer, her container still tight in her arms, but no longer, hidden completely. Its surface gleamed in the green light. Strange markings carved into it. The man's eyes locked on it, his body weak, his throat burning. Instinct told him that inside that container was the key to survival, the lifeline that might save them both, but he didn't reach for it. Not yet. Trust had only just begun. So the two of them sat there, trapped in the collapsed cave, a broken man and a fragile alien girl, their silence broken now and then by whispers. Her name, his clumsy attempt to speak it, her soft replies. The cave no longer felt completely empty. The shadows no longer absolute, for in the midst of hunger, thirst, and despair, the man had found something unexpected. A tiny stranger who might soon become his only hope. The man woke to silence, his body aching from the stone floor, every muscle stiff, every breath shallow. The dim glow from his headlamp had faded to almost nothing. The only light came from the small alien girl sitting across from him, her skin faintly glowing in the dark. She was awake, watching him with wide eyes, her arms wrapped tight around the strange container, the same way a child might cling to a blanket. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. She looked as weak as he felt. His stomach growled loudly, the sound echoing in the still cave. The girl flinched at the noise, then lowered her head. Her own stomach answered a moment later with a softer growl. They were both starving. The man pushed himself up slowly, his throat dry, his lips cracked. He searched the broken remains of his gear again, but there was nothing left. No food, no water, only scraps of useless plastic and metal. He leaned against the wall, his chest heavy with despair. He thought of the ration bar he had given her the day before. His last piece of real food, his act of kindness had won her a little trust, but now he had nothing more to give. The girl held the container tighter, almost as if she feared he would try to take it from her. Her glowing eyes narrowed with suspicion. She whispered something in her soft alien tongue, words he could not understand, but her tone was clear. She was warning him. He raised his hand slowly, shaking his head. "No," he whispered hoarsely. "I won't take it." His voice cracked, his body weak, but the hunger clawed at him like fire in his veins. The thirst burned his throat raw, his vision blurred, every heartbeat felt heavier. The girl studied him in silence, her silver hair falling into her glowing eyes. Then slowly she tipped the container and drank. Her throat moved gently as she swallowed. Her body shivered as the liquid gave her strength. The man stared, his heart pounding. Whatever was inside that container, it was keeping her alive, and if he did not have some soon, he would die. His head fell back against the wall, his eyes closing, dark thoughts creeping in. He had come here to explore, to survive. But now he was trapped, reduced to a helpless creature begging silently for life. He opened his eyes again when he heard movement. The girl was still clutching the container, but her gaze was fixed on him. Her glowing eyes no longer only fearful. They held something else now, something that looked like conflict. She whispered her name again, softly, like a reminder of who she was, then crawled a little closer, her small frame trembling with each movement. The man held his breath, afraid to startle her, his body tense, his heart thundering. She stopped just in front of him, the container still clutched tight to her chest. Her small hand shook as she lifted the lid. A faint scent filled the air, warm, strange, almost sweet. His dry throat ached at the smell, his whole body desperate for even one drop. The girl dipped her fingers inside and then carefully held them out toward him. A few drops clung to her fingertips, shimmering faintly in the green light. The man stared at her hand. His breath caught. She was offering it to him, her most precious lifeline. His hands trembled as he leaned forward, his cracked lips brushing against her fingers. He tasted it, strange and thick, unlike any water, but warm. Alive, it slid down his throat and spread through his body like fire and comfort at once. Strength returned, faint but real. His vision cleared slightly, his heart steadied. The girl pulled her hand back quickly, clutching the container tight again, her glowing eyes wide, watching him carefully, testing his reaction. He swallowed hard, his eyes locking on hers. He whispered her name softly, his voice steadier now. gratitude filling every syllable. For the first time, she didn't shrink away. Instead, her lips trembled and she whispered something back, his name or something close to it, her attempt to return the trust he had shown. The cave was still dark, the hunger still heavy, but something had changed. They were no longer strangers, no longer enemies guarding what little they had. They were survivors, forced together, bound by need. The man leaned back, his body still weak, but no longer on the edge of death. The girl sat close now, her container still hugged to her chest, but no longer hidden completely. The hunger had brought them to the edge. The hunger had broken the wall of fear between them. He closed his eyes for a moment, hearing the faint drip of water, feeling the warmth of her glow beside him. Tomorrow would bring more pain, more struggle, but tonight, in the heart of the collapsed cave, he had something he didn't have before, a lifeline, and a fragile bond with a tiny alien girl who might be the only reason he lived to see the sun again. The man sat in the darkness, his body trembling from exhaustion, yet a faint spark of strength had returned to him. The drops the alien girl had shared still lingered in his throat, strange but alive. It was unlike water, unlike food, yet his body clung to it. The girl watched him carefully. Her glowing eyes unblinking, she still hugged the container to her chest, her thin arms wrapped around it as if it were part of her soul. She had shared only a few drops, just enough to keep him from falling into death. He whispered her name again, his voice steady this time. She tilted her head, the silver strands of her hair catching the faint light from her skin. She did not answer, but she did not pull away either. Hours dragged by, the cave pressing down on them like a tomb. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. Thirst burned at his throat again, but now there was a thread of hope, because he had tasted the lifeline she carried. The girl shifted, curling against the rock, her small body shivering. She whispered something soft, almost like a prayer, her hand stroking the container gently, the way one would comfort a living thing. The man realized then, it was not only her lifeline, it was her responsibility, her burden, perhaps even her gift. She was young, yet she carried something powerful enough to sustain life, something she trusted no one else to hold. He thought of reaching for it, thought of begging for more, but he stopped himself. The memory of fear in her eyes when he had first seen her clutch it was still sharp. If he took too much, if he broke her fragile trust, they would both be lost. So he waited, even as his strength faded again, even as his body ached for more. He forced himself to be patient. At last the girl crawled closer, her movements hesitant, her knees scraping against the stone. She stopped just an arm's length away, her container still clutched tight, her glowing eyes locked on his. Slowly she opened the lid, her hands trembling. She dipped her fingers once more, then stretched them out toward him. This time, instead of only a few drops, she held her hand longer, letting him take more. The strange liquid coated his lips, slid down his throat, warmth spreading through his chest. His body shivered as energy returned. He gasped softly, pressing his back to the wall, closing his eyes as life seeped back into him. He whispered, "Thank you," though he knew she couldn't understand. When he opened his eyes, she was staring, her glowing gaze softer now, curious, almost trusting. He pointed at the container, then at himself, then at her, trying to make her understand. She frowned, clutching it tighter. Shaking her head, she whispered in her alien tongue, the sound like wind over glass. He didn't need a translation. Her body language said enough. She was willing to share, but it was hers, and she was afraid. The man nodded slowly, raising his hands in peace again. "Yours," he whispered. "I understand." He leaned back, showing he would not force her. The girl's tense shoulders eased slightly. She crawled a little closer and sat beside him, still holding the container, but no longer hiding it. The glow from her skin brushed against his arm, faint but warm. The cave felt different now, less like a grave, more like a shelter. As the hours passed, they settled into a rhythm. When his strength waned, she offered a little more. When her tiny frame trembled, he shared his warmth, wrapping his arms gently around her to keep her from freezing. They could not speak the same language, but their survival taught them words beyond sound. Her eyes asking if he was strong enough, his nod telling her to rest, her trembling hand offering him life when he needed it most. The lifeline had bound them together, not only in survival, but in trust. Yet the man knew something else, something heavy. This lifeline would not last forever. The container was not endless. She drank from it often, and he could see the level dropping slowly. Each time she shared with him, it diminished further. Hope and fear mixed inside him. What if it ran dry before they found a way out? What if she weakened too much to survive? What if he was left with nothing but her lifeless body in his arms? He shook the thought away, forcing himself to focus. He could not let despair return, not now, not after she had chosen to share. Instead, he looked at her, this fragile creature who had given him life and silently promised himself something. If he had to crawl through stone, fight with his last breath, or bleed until he could no longer move, he would find a way to get her out, because she had saved him. And now he owed her everything. The cave creaked around them, a reminder that the world above was still dangerous, still ready to bury them deeper. The air was cold, the hunger never truly gone, but together they endured. The man leaned his head back against the stone. The girl, curled beside him, her tiny frame pressed close, the container still clutched tight. In the endless dark, there was only the two of them, one human, one alien child, and the lifeline that tied their fates together. The man closed his eyes, whispering her name like a prayer, his body weak but his will burning. Tomorrow, they would find a way forward. Tomorrow, he would repay the trust she had given. But for now, in this fragile moment, they lived. And that was enough. The man woke with a start, his breath heavy, the cave around him still cloaked in silence. The faint glow from the alien girl's skin lit the darkness like a fragile lamp. She was curled beside him, her container clutched against her chest, her silver hair tangled over her face. For the first time since the collapse, he did not feel completely alone. The weight of despair was still there, but it was softer, because now he had her, and she had him. The man shifted slowly, careful not to startle her. His movement stirred the air. The girl's glowing eyes flicked open. She blinked at him, her lips parting slightly, then closed again as if reassured that he was still there. She whispered something in her alien tongue, a soft word almost like a song. He could not understand, but her tone was gentle, no longer afraid, no longer defensive. He whispered her name back, his voice cracked but steady. She tilted her head, and for the first time her lips curved into something faint, something that looked like a smile. The hunger in his body remained, the thirst gnawed at him, but the bond between them dulled the edge of despair. He knew she was his lifeline, and he was hers. The hours passed in silence, broken only by the drip of distant water and the faint rumble of stone above. Every sound reminded them that the cave could shift again, that death could come without warning. Yet together they endured. At one point, the girl rose unsteadily to her feet, her tiny frame trembling. She carried the container carefully as if it weighed more than her body. She tipped it to her lips, drank, then turned to him. This time she didn't hesitate. She stepped closer and lifted the container toward him, her glowing eyes steady, her hands shaking with the effort of trust. The man's chest tightened. He reached out slowly, wrapping his trembling hands around the container. It was warm to the touch, its strange surface covered in markings he couldn't understand. She did not let go, her small hands still gripping it, but she tilted it enough for him to drink. The liquid slid down his throat, thick and strange, yet life filled his chest, strength creeping back into his limbs. When he lowered it, he looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. He whispered softly, "Thank you." She didn't understand the word, but she understood the look, the tone, and she gave a small nod. For the first time, the bond between them felt real, not just survival, but trust. They began to move together through the cave, searching for a path. He carried her when she was too weak to climb, his arms straining, his body aching, yet he refused to let her walk when her legs trembled. She clung to him with surprising strength for someone so small, her glowing eyes never leaving his face. In return, she shared her lifeline whenever he faltered, when his steps slowed, when his breath grew ragged. She would press the container into his hands, whispering soft words he could not understand, words that sounded like comfort. The cave was merciless. The stone floor cut into his boots, jagged rocks tore at his clothes, sharp air froze his lungs, but together they pressed forward one step at a time. At night, they huddled close against the cold, the girl's faint glow surrounding them like a fragile shield. Sometimes she would rest her head against his chest, her tiny breath steady, as if listening to his heartbeat to know he was still alive. He, in turn, would whisper human words to her, stories of the sky, of stars beyond the cave, of warmth and light. She could not understand, but she listened, her glowing eyes wide with curiosity. The bond deepened in ways he could not explain. She was no longer just a stranger, no longer just a fragile child in the dark. She was his reason to keep moving, his anchor against despair. One day, as they crawled through a narrow passage, the ground shifted. A sharp crack echoed through the stone. Rocks tumbled. The girl cried out, nearly slipping into a pit. The man lunged forward, his hands seizing her small frame just in time. He pulled her, close. His body pressed against hers to shield her from falling stone. His back took the blows. Pain seared through him, but he held on. When the rumble ended, she clung to him, her tiny hands gripping his shirt, her glowing eyes wet with tears. She whispered something again and again, her voice shaking, her face buried against his chest. He didn't know the words, but he understood the meaning. She was afraid of losing him. He stroked her hair gently, whispering, "I'm here." Though the words meant nothing to her language, the tone meant everything. From that moment, something changed between them. She no longer looked at him with only curiosity or fear. She looked at him with trust, with dependence, with the certainty that he would protect her. And he knew in his heart that he would. No matter the cost, the bond was sealed in hunger and fear. In the endless dark, it was fragile yet unbreakable. They were no longer two strangers trapped by chance. They were survivors bound by trust, by sacrifice, by the lifeline they shared, and in that bond, the man felt something he had not felt since the cave collapsed, something he thought he had lost forever: hope. The man's body ached, every step heavier than the last, but he refused to stop. The tiny alien girl clung to his shoulder, her glowing eyes fixed on the darkness ahead, her container still gripped tightly in her arms. The cave stretched on without mercy, walls closing in, passages twisting, the air sharp and cold. He had lost count of the days. Hunger gnawed at him, thirst clawed at his throat. Yet the bond between them pushed him forward. They had survived this long together, but survival was not enough. They needed a way out. The man stopped when he noticed something new. A faint breeze had brushed against his cheek, cool and steady. Not the heavy, still air of the tunnels. His chest tightened with hope. Air meant space. Space meant a way forward, maybe even a way out. He lowered the girl gently to the ground, pointing ahead. She tilted her head, listening, her long ears twitching. Then she nodded quickly, her glowing eyes widening. She felt it too. Together they moved down the narrow passage, the walls scraping his shoulders, the rocks cutting his hands. The girl stayed close, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of his torn shirt. Each step was a struggle, but the breeze grew stronger. At last the passage opened into a wider cavern, and for the first time, he saw light. Not the glow of her skin, not the weak shine of his broken headlamp, but real light. Faint, distant, but real. His breath caught. He staggered forward, but then froze, because between them and the light stretched a jagged slope, sharp rocks jutting like teeth, a drop that fell into blackness. The only way across was narrow, dangerous, and slick with moisture. The girl gasped softly, her glowing eyes filled with fear. She whispered something in her tongue, clinging tighter. To her container, the man knelt, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "We have to try," he whispered. even though she couldn't understand. His tone steady, calm. He lifted her onto his back, securing her small arms around his neck, her container pressing cold against his chest. Then he stepped onto the narrow path. Every stone groaned under his weight. Every breath echoed in the cavern. His heart pounded with fear. One slip would mean death for both of them. The girl's small voice whispered against his ear. Words he didn't know, but tones he could understand. Pleas, prayers. Her trust placed fully in him. Step by step he moved forward, his boots slipping on wet stone. His arms scraping against jagged walls, sweat dripped into his eyes. His muscles screamed, but he refused to falter. Halfway across, the path trembled. A chunk of stone crumbled beneath his foot. The man lurched, his body tipping toward the pit. The girl cried out, clutching him tighter. With a roar of desperation, he slammed his hand against the wall, his palm torn open by the sharp rock. Pain seared through him, blood smeared against stone. But his grip held. He dragged himself back. To balance, his chest heaving, the girl pressed her glowing forehead against the back of his neck, her small voice whispering his name, or the closest sound she could make, her words shaking, filled with fear and hope. The man gritted his teeth, forcing himself onward, inch by inch, step by step, until finally his boots struck solid ground. He collapsed to his knees, gasping but alive. The girl slid off his back, clutching her container tightly, her glowing eyes wide with relief. She reached out with trembling fingers, touched his bloodied hand, and whispered softly, her tone filled. With gratitude, he smiled weakly, whispering her name in reply. The bond between them stronger than ever. But the escape was not yet won. The light ahead was still faint. Blocked by more rock, a crack in the cavern wall, narrow but promising. The man crawled forward, pressing his shoulder against the crack. Stone bit into his flesh. His chest squeezed, but he pushed, grunting with effort. The girl followed behind, her small frame slipping through more easily, her glow guiding him. At last the stone gave way and fresh air rushed in, cool, clean, alive. He gasped, his lungs filling with hope. The girl laughed softly for the first time, the sound high and musical, her glowing eyes shining brighter as she tugged at his arm, pointing toward the opening. With one final push, the man forced his body through, tumbling onto damp grass, the scent of soil and plants filling his senses. Above them, the sky stretched wide, painted with stars. The girl stumbled beside him, clutching her container, her glowing skin shimmering under the night sky. She looked up with wide eyes, her lips parting in awe. She whispered something soft, reverent, as if she had never seen the stars before. The man lay on his back, staring at the heavens, his chest heaving. The pain in his body, nothing compared to the relief flooding him. They had escaped. They were alive. The girl crawled closer, curling against his side, her container still pressed, tight to her chest, but her free hand resting lightly against his arm. For the first time since the collapse, he allowed himself to believe they might survive. Not just because of luck, not just because of the cave's mercy, but because they had each other. The man lay on the grass outside the cave. The cold night, air washing over him. Every breath felt heavy, but it was freedom. Real air, real sky. Not the choking silence of stone. The stars above spread endlessly, like silver fires in the darkness. Beside him, the tiny alien girl sat curled up, her container hugged tight to her chest, her glowing eyes reflecting the starlight. For a long moment, neither spoke, neither moved. They simply breathed together, survivors in a world that had almost swallowed them whole. The man turned his head, watching her. She was fragile, thin, her silver hair tangled and dirty. Yet she looked stronger now than when he had first found her. Stronger because she had endured. She caught his gaze and tilted her head, her lips parting slightly. Then she whispered his name. Or at least the sound she had made for him, the strange, broken syllables filled with warmth. His chest tightened, he smiled weakly, whispering her name back. His voice soft, steady. The bond between them unspoken yet undeniable. The cave was behind them, but survival was not finished. His body was weak, her small frame trembling from exhaustion. They needed food, shelter, safety. But for the first time, the man felt something new. Hope. The girl shifted, crawling closer. She placed the container gently in his lap, her glowing eyes serious, her tiny hands pushing it toward him. He froze, staring at her. This was her lifeline, the one thing that had kept her alive all this time, and yet she was offering it freely. Not just drops, not just sips, but the whole of it. Slowly he shook his head, pushing it back toward her. Yours, he whispered. Keep it. She frowned, confusion flickering in her glowing eyes. She whispered something in her alien tongue, her tone firm, almost commanding, her small hand pushing the container against his chest again. The man's eyes burned, not from thirst, but from the weight of what she was doing. In her world, in her heart, she had chosen to share her life completely with him, with trembling hands. He lifted the container, took a sip, then gently returned it to her. He would not take it all. He would never take more than what was needed. Her glowing eyes softened, and she gave the faintest smile, curling beside him once more. As dawn touched the horizon, light spilling across the alien sky, the world around them came alive. Strange trees swayed in the breeze, creatures called. From the distance, the land was both dangerous and beautiful. The man stood slowly, his body weak but determined. He looked down at the girl, her small frame rising with tired breaths. He held out his hand. Come, he whispered. She looked at him, her glowing eyes wide. Then she placed her tiny hand in his, her grip fragile but sure. Together, they stepped forward, leaving the collapsed cave behind, stepping into a world of unknown dangers, but also new beginnings. Every step was a promise. He would protect her, and she would keep him alive. As they walked, she tugged lightly on his sleeve, whispering something soft, then pointing toward the horizon where the sky blazed with strange colors. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She wanted to go there. She believed there was hope waiting. The man nodded, squeezing her hand gently, his voice steady. We'll make it, he said. The girl leaned against his side, her small body glowing faintly in the rising sun. Her container pressed close, her trust given fully. The gay bond they had forged in darkness was now their strength. He thought of how it began, with fear, with hunger, with despair, and how it had grown into trust, into sacrifice, into something far greater than survival. They were not just survivors anymore. They were companions. Two lives tied together. The galaxy would never understand. Perhaps no one would believe their story, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the promise they had made without words. He would never abandon her, and she would never let him fall. The man looked once more at the horizon, the strange sun rising higher, its light spilling across the alien world. A new beginning had come. And together, human and alien child, they would face it side by side.